Good afternoon and welcome to Saturday Sesh. My name is Trey Reckling, founder and director of the Academy of Cannabis Science, and we do this the first Saturday of every month, and we're very pleased to have you and our guests on today, and especially happy and pleased that our speaker, our special guest, is joining us today from the UK, and that's Chris Trasker. He's the founder and CEO of Global Cannabinoid Solutions. I had the pleasure of meeting Chris, I don't know, just in the last few years, and we've become friends and continue to talk. We haven't met in person yet, so you know him virtually, like I know him virtually. But Chris has been doing some fantastic work in the UK, where he wants things to be farther along than they are, and rather than waiting, he said, "Hey, let's get it done. I can lead a troop of people, and we can increase the Canna IQ here." And so, Chris, really happy to have you on today. It's what, after 8 p.m. there?
Just getting to 8:15, yeah, Trey, but dedicated, so I'm here. And yeah, thank you, Trey, for as well inviting me, and lovely to meet everyone as well. Thank you for all the lovely introductions, and I'll try and tailor my stories so that it's slightly more relevant to you guys as well. And happy to answer any questions
Yeah,
about the
well,
UK, anything we're doing. Yeah.
now I'm going to start off with some for you. And if you don't mind, just tell us, hey, how did you get started in the cannabis industry? Because we know nobody's really born into this, or a few people are born into this. How did you choose that direction?
So at university, I was doing medical research, and whilst as you go through the sort of medical research curriculum, at the end you have a sort of topic that you specialize in or an area of research with a professor. And I saw on the list of things that you could specialize in that there was CBD in the gut and cannabinoids in inflammation. I thought, what on earth is that? Signed myself up for it, and haven't looked back since, really. And so that just sort of opened the can of worms that is the cannabis conversation, all the research that's out there, and basically just got very frustrated with all of the lovely science and information that I was reading, and then seeing all the misinformation and sort of taboo and sort of scars of prohibition still. I thought I'd get out there and just try and share some of the information, help dispel some of the myths, and yeah, change some of the stigmas around cannabis as best I could. So all, I guess, fairly spontaneous, but all really just, I got out of enjoyment, enjoyed the science, and then able to get out of the lab and apply it to the real world. So yeah, that's my little entry in a nutshell. And then haven't really looked back since. So cannabis clubs, industry consulting, bits of education, training, things like that. So yeah, bit of a nutshell of everything. And I'm sure we'll dive into a few of those different areas and some of the other conversations that are out there. And yeah, try and give you as full of a picture as I can around yeah, what's going on over here in the UK, because it's a bit of a, well, there's all sorts going on, all sorts talked about, but not really a lot of progress on in the real world, really. So yeah,
So yeah, tell us a little bit about that, since I don't know if anybody on the call has had an opportunity to go to the UK and scout that out. So what's it look like on the ground? What is it is it a CBD only game, like a lot of countries that aren't fully online now, where people are kind of getting their footing? Where are there shops, or what's it look like?
So well, up until 2018, zero cannabis products were allowed on the shelves, anything like that. So post 2018, after a big sort of patient rally almost, and sort of humanity campaign around children with epilepsy and the effect that this cannabis was having on their seizures and basically completely changing their lives around, the UK government decided, well, we'll create some sort of medical system, allow some medical access. Unfortunately, that's private medicine. There's 2 prescriptions that have been given out on the NHS. So the NHS pays for just 2 of the few thousand private cannabis prescriptions that there are. And then beneath that medical access, we've got wellness. So we do have CBD products. We haven't quite decided yet how we want to regulate them or what we want to have as a sort of standards or, I guess, procedures and guidelines for the industry. So it's still very much a bit of wild, wild west still, and understanding from a consumer's perspective as well, and from a patient's perspective, it's really hard to navigate the product space, the medical space, and just try and get some actual information that you can help use to make a decision. So that's where we try and sort of fill those gaps. But there are licenses that you can also get for hemp cultivation. But the problem is you can't extract anything from that hemp, and it has to be below 0.02% THC in that crop. So if it's over that, sometimes you have to destroy it, or the product can't be used. And so it's very stringent and sort of a bit of a patchwork basis. If you can do this, but you can't do that. And there's all these conditions. But if you are one of the 99% who maybe grow some cannabis at home and want to be using your own cannabis supply, that's still illegal in the eyes of the law. And I know in a lot of parts of North America, that personal use, that personal sort of independent cultivation and self-supply, I suppose, is that's seen as almost as a human right. And I know the UN's been pretty big on not persecuting those for their drug use, and particularly when it's got potentially therapeutic benefits as well. So that hasn't quite trickled into the UK system yet, but there's definitely momentum that's being built, and it's heading in the right direction. But obviously it's not quite, well, it's far from perfect, and there's still a lot of patients getting stuck in the criminal system. There's a lot of police forces that have different views on cannabis. Some are less liberal and don't quite keep up with the law. So you'll find a lot of policemen arrest the patient who's got a prescription, sees their cannabis, even though they've got a prescription, because they don't realize that the law's changed, and that basically they think that this person is trying to pull the wool over my eyes and lie to me and say, what do you mean cannabis is legal and doctors prescribed you? I don't believe that. And so most doctors, most policemen, most sort of local authorities in the UK, although the law has changed, they're not quite sure how to implement any of this, how to sort of like, what do I say to patients? I've had no training on any of this. So like you were saying there, Trey, that cannabis IQ really needs to sort of scale up at the moment so that the public can get the benefit of that plant and of that substance. And so how to do that safely, how to source it, all of these then subsequent questions that come about are all quite interesting, but also then those are problems that we can solve, and as an industry that we can sort of address. But you know how these political industrial conversations go, so it isn't always as easy as we hope. But that's sort of in a nutshell where we're up to in the UK. And I forgot to mention as well, we do have some guerrilla cannabis clubs that have popped up, which are sort of patient groups where they've got together as a cohort, all in a bit of a cooperative, growing their own, supplying their own, circulating amongst their group, in sort of a private members group sort of fashion. And those were basically how patients were accessing cannabis before 2018. Those yet haven't built any, well, gained any sort of formal recognition, but they're probably that's where most people get their cannabis from, is a cannabis club or from a friend or from like a community in some way. So those private medical groups really want all of those people to buy their private cannabis rather than their community cannabis in a way. So there's this bit of what we call it, a bit of a polarity fighting a way to
Right.
get on top. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what's going on at the moment. So it's a bit of a patchwork and all over the place. If you're a patient, if you're a consumer, where do you start? It's yeah, bit of a nightmare.
Sure. And what you describe, could be a lot of the states in the U.S. right now, right? Where if you're in Missouri, if you're in, I don't know, Kansas, a lot of deep South states, and James, you might correct me on the Kansas thing, but we have about half of the states in the union here that certainly don't have recreational, and what passes for medical in some of those medical states is pretty unevolved.
Oh no, it's still quite Republic Christian, and no.
Yep.
Missouri is letting it happen. Recreation stores. My niece has a medical card, so she's getting what? It's expensive.
Yeah.
But it has allowances to where she can go down to Oklahoma where it's better.
Okay. So yeah, Oklahoma's kind of Wild West. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So Chris, let me ask you, I read stories about skunk weed in the UK. And when I started reading about skunk weed, I'm like, what is this stuff? And then I read more, and they will say skunk weed / sensimilla, which If anybody speaks Spanish, Sinsemilla means without seeds, which is what we just consider good weed. But skunk weed kind of in bold sometimes, and it sounds really scary and like it's making people so high they can't handle themselves. Talk to me a little bit about this skunk weed.
So I guess if you want to deter people from using cannabis, you throw big terms around and sort of create that sort of fear craze. And the term skunk is very much like how marijuana was used back in the day to sort of marginalize cannabis use and basically separate the private cannabis stuff, which is medical cannabis, from that dangerous street stuff, which is skunk, and it causes psychosis and all these other things. So it's been all of this language and this polarity sort of stuff post 2018 was like that was a sort of narrative that was built. It became this THC versus CBD debate, and medical cannabis versus recreational cannabis, and then skunk versus medical cannabis, and all of these just sort of divisions started to occur to try and separate and distance what's our good medicine grown in a greenhouse versus, or grown in a GMP facility, versus what you could grow at home. There are obviously different strengths of cannabis as well, which people sort of classify as skunk, but no one in the UK that is a cannabis user seriously calls cannabis skunk. They say it as a joke. Like people say reefer today for a laugh, like just jokingly, to sort of make light of how once upon a time it was really bad to use reefer, and it was a sort of satanic diabolical act to use reefer. Same goes for skunk. It's just like anyone that's below the age of 40, 50 just sort of jokingly uses skunk instead of cannabis, just as a in mockery, more or less, at this point. But in politics and in the media, it's taken really serious and demonizes this crazy stuff that the kids are smoking that turns everyone blind and drives everyone to insanity. So it's one of those sort of marijuana labels that have emerged, but really it's just unregulated cannabis, and it's a new sort of classification way of sort of separating medical cannabis from that homegrown dangerous stuff, basically. So it's quite a fun term. It catches good in the headlines, and it's an eye-catching word, isn't it?
For sure. And if you all aren't reading articles like that from places other than the US, we encourage you to do it. But yeah, the reefer madness is alive and well. It's alive and well here. And it's we have people pushing back, as we talked about on a Tuesday night student lounge. Recently a couple of hosts on Fox News are talking about that these mass shootings are happening because people are smoking cannabis, right? Like crazy commentary still going on here, while while other people are following the science and being realistic. But good news, Chris, it looks like more than half of the respondents in public surveys now in the UK support legalization of cannabis. So it looks like things are on the right track. You all are moving forward. I know one of the things you have done to help move the needle is create this beautiful Canna manual. And that's how I met you, is being introduced to you as an author of the Canna manual. I know it's taken hours and hours of research. It's beautifully put together as far as how you organized your thoughts and the science behind it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, how did that come to be? What got you started there?
Well, thank you, Trey. It wasn't as glamorous as it sounds whilst I was writing it. I was just basically during lockdown, sat in the shared office and basically converting one of my master's research thesis into a book almost. And I was having the same conversation with everyone, more or less, giving them the full spiel on what's going on in the UK. Why am I hearing about cannabis? Can it actually help me? What's CBD? What's the endocannabinoid system? And so I thought, right, I'm sick of having this conversation. I'm going to put it into a book. And there we go with the Canna manual. And a friend of mine drew a front cover for me, which is the little logo behind me. So basically that was it in a nutshell. And during lockdown, not a lot else to do. I actually hate writing as well, so it was the last thing I thought I'd be doing. But then basically, again, out of frustration and as this the feel for the need for this information to sort of be out there and do something useful. That was my first project, and had some lovely support from some of the other groups in the community who helped me sort of spread it, review it, refine it, and make sure that it was as sort of coherent as possible. So trying to bust as many myths as possible, use it as a bit of a user guide, consumer guide, and also just summarize the UK and just how the narrative and the law and what we hear in the media doesn't quite match up with the facts. And so just having a conversation about that misalignment almost, and seeing what potentially the future holds for cannabis in the UK and yeah, I guess across the world as well for medicine and patients. So that was it in a nutshell. And yeah, glad I did it, but I don't know if I've got another one or the patience for another book in me. So yeah.
Well, it's a very nice effort. Even though you say you're not a writer, like I said, well put together. That's available on Amazon under the Canna Manual, and you can look and obviously under the name Christopher Trasker, and so you can find that on there available as a ebook. Also, you can get a printed copy. Let me ask you: have you faced any backlash for your either professional backlash, family backlash for your outspokenness? Because obviously not everybody believes this sort of thing, or some people believe, you're a spokesman for the devil and you're trying to lead children into a life of drug use and debauchery. So what kind of feedback have you gotten?
So from my family, all of my family are pretty much in law enforcement. So that was when I started my degree, that was the first initial question, because they couldn't believe it. No way is what is he doing, more or less. So I was like the family disappointment almost, doing research but into all these dangerous drugs. And then yeah, ended up writing the book. Lots of people saw the benefits. We had the law change, and then more and more people just started basically having more of a conversation around it. So it's been very warmly received, really. And I remember when I was doing medical research at university, whilst I was doing that research, I was having to speak with a lot of doctors, go into the hospital, because our research department is basically attached to the back of the hospital. And so we had to go into hospital to get bits of human to test on, basically. And so when you start speaking to doctors, they take interest and go, well, what's this student studying? What are you doing? Why are you in our surgery taking bits of colon and gut? And when you told them about, well, we're doing cannabinoid research, they have this instant image of us with cannabis plants in the hospital, giving them to patients just frolicking in cannabis plants. And obviously that couldn't be further from it. We were putting sort of petri dishes, doing the classic experiment in a test tube sort of thing. And so it was always interesting seeing that some reactions, people really interested, and some doctors really open-minded and interested in it. Others saw it as that, my God, who's let this lunatic into the hospital? You can't be doing this. How on earth is this allowed at our hospital? And just all of these really fearful comments, basically, when yeah, it was a legitimate research degree. The ethics committee couldn't get their heads around it either. They were like, but you can't give cannabis to patients. We're like, we're not giving cannabis to patients. We're taking tumors out of patients, putting them in a test tube, and then putting cannabinoids on the tumors and seeing what happens. There's no patients touching any cannabis. And it was just the fear and all of the confusion and all of the just befuddlement almost around cannabis being used in that capacity I thought it was really funny, but I was also I guess made me realize the scale of the issue in a way. And so yeah, I'd say no massive backlash really. Everyone's been very supportive, and it's just that initial putting your head above the parapet, I guess. And like 4 years ago, people were scared to follow and like any sort of cannabis related Facebook page or social media pages. It was this, but what if my employer sees? And so everyone was terrified of that. And so as soon as the law changed, there seemed to be a bit of a conversation starting, but no one knew what was true, what was false. And so all sorts was going on. So I think it was, yeah, quite welcomed. People saw the value in it. And yeah, my family, I guess, have sort of seen they appreciate what I do, but they maybe don't quite understand it, I guess. And so I still get lots of the classic stereotypes and things like that. So yeah, it's all been good though, very positive, and I think, yeah, hopefully only get better. And yeah, as well, thank you for kind words, Trey, about my little book and writing endeavors.
No, for sure, for sure. And it's interesting to hear about that hospital interaction. I'd like to come back to that. But, you know, we're at the bottom of the hour, and typically we like to turn it over to our people on the call, because I'm getting to share this call with interested people. And so I want to ask what questions you might have, because I got more. But what questions might you have for Chris? Anybody?
Send them my way.
What sort of viable potency are people able to actually get their hands on, aside from CBD, when we're talking THC levels? I mean, when people actually, when they're not growing themselves, and when they're trying to find products and what have you, what's the likelihood of any level above something more like 10 or 12%?
So if you go to the standard medical prescription route, you'll go to your private clinic, you'll pay them for a consultation. They'll typically go, based on my very little brief background in cannabis medicine, I'd suggest probably an inhaled flower. There are tinctures available. For the flowers and the sort of I don't know, inflorescences that you can buy, there isn't a particularly broad range, and the product that does come through, you're only able to get it batch at a time. So it makes it hard to go, oh, well, look, I found a strain that's perfect for me. It might not be there next time you want it and next time you want to order it. So from the perspective of the medical cannabis company, it's all cannabis. The patient should just buy it anyway. But what they don't appreciate is that each plant is pretty unique. Each crop is pretty unique. And so for a patient, the relief and the subjective effect is also pretty unique. So each endocannabinoid system in each one of those patients is going to be completely different. So although the cannabis is standardized, quote unquote, in the UK, and to answer your question as well, James, like the potency, they try and cap it and just keep it as, again, standardized and flat as they can. And then if there are THC CBD ratios, they'll maybe go for a tincture that has more THC than CBD in it. But the selection, the product quality, stuff like that's from the patients that I know and the community that uses it, having gone from homegrown, where they have their own independent supply, where it's a community of people who have the same conditions and use the same stuff, grow the same stuff, to grown by someone else. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't get to see it beforehand. It just turns up in the post in a random pot. It's quite a difference, and it's not necessarily the best patient experience, or it's not very patient centric, should I say, as well. So it's yeah, whitewashed.
By the way, I don't know if you can see it. I just bought your book.
Oh, cool.
Actually, I bought 2 of them.
Oh, wow. Well, that's for Tuesday as well. That's a pretty quick. Jeff Bezos is doing a good job on the delivery schedule there.
Well, when I buy certain books, I buy one for display and one for thumbing through. I have lots of cannabis-related books. In fact, I know a few authors, and I helped produce a couple. So. Oh,
well. I need lots of help, James. There's definitely a version 2.0 that needs to at some point, a bit of an update. But yeah, I hope that answers your question anyway. And if any, there's lots of nuances, I guess, to that product conversation. And
let me ask a follow-up, if I may. Good question, James. So how about price? Are
Oh
your
gosh.
prices in the store going to be more than prices on the street for?
So obviously, if you grow it yourself, you feel like you're getting it for free pretty much.
Uh-huh.
When you go to a friend, £5 to £10 per gram is typically what you expect to pay, which is maybe no. At the moment, our currency is dreadful, so it's probably about $8 to $10, maybe let's say $7 to $10 per gram. What I still can't get my head around is that doctors are selling buds of weed, at least turn it into a product rather than just sell weed, first of all. But price wise, they try to keep it below £10 a gram, usually £5 a gram, just so that it deters that black market use.
Right.
Most of those companies, though, are producing it at like 5 cents per gram. So they're still making a fat profit selling it at £5 a gram. And there's a lot of people taking cuts on that in between. But again, not everyone can maybe then afford that private prescription cost, so it's quite cost prohibitive. And often that's the deterrent for a lot of people. Most people in the UK can't afford private medicine. We're reliant on the NHS, and so you've got to wait with the as NHS isn't perfect, but you will get treated eventually and for nothing. Whereas these private avenues, if you can afford it, you can pay a premium and get ahead of the queue almost. And so that is the sort of divide at the moment. And there's a couple of thousand people who've been able to pay and access privately, but 99.9% of the population still don't have any easy access route, basically. And so if there were suddenly double the amount of users, double the amount of cannabis wouldn't really do the job. There's just too much variety, too much need, and not enough consistency in that sort of product flow. So you couldn't go and get the same thing reliably and go, I found the strain for me, or the ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes and what have you for me, whatever that plant's called, it might not be there next week, and you might not get it for 6 months again until maybe someone's grown it. So if you've got that at home, or your friend's still growing what they had before, you're pretty much going to go and go, well, screw this, I'm going to go back and supplement or switch sources back over. And if I can grow it myself, then what the hell do I need to pay for any of this for in the first place? So that's I guess the sort of thought dynamic at the moment that exists. And so the medical clinics are basically trying to navigate those patient questions, but they don't speak to enough patients to understand that most of them don't want to buy their cannabis, and if they do, they're not typically very impressed with it because they're used to homegrown stuff that's grown on a one-to-one basis rather than grown en masse and standardized and then radiated and bleached and, I guess, again, whitewashed in different ways. So yes, it's potentially clean, it's potentially meeting the right prices, but the whole experience again isn't very patient.
It's
friendly.
treated more like produce than
Precisely, yeah.
Cannabis, and that's where
It's a living thing, yeah.
Good insight. And and it's interesting. But meanwhile, those people are taking profound personal risks to grow the cannabis and risking having their door kicked in, or being busted in upon and taken to jail like a violent criminal, right?
Basically, yeah.
So yeah, people and here are people still taking risks for patients as well. Obviously, there's some profit involved, but a lot of people doing so just for the love of patients and knowing that the law hasn't caught up. The people making the laws haven't become more reasonable. So let me ask anybody, what other questions exist?
This is Natalie. I have a question, if you don't mind.
Please, Natalie.
Could you tell me again what year the law changed, or what changed in 2018? Was that the year it became medical marijuana or cannabis became legal? Is that it?
So what they did was basically reschedule cannabis in the country.
Oh, okay.
And in doing so, So I can't remember whether they went from Schedule 1, where it says no medicinal value, to Schedule 2, where there is medicinal value, so that then medical products could be basically created, sold, and manufactured through pharmaceutical methods. But that was basically November 2018. And they changed that scheduling, but they didn't create any infrastructure, provide any education or any information for the subsequent implementation of that new law update. So again, most of the policemen don't know that the law has changed.
Okay.
Most people don't know that the law has changed. Most doctors don't know that the law has changed, most nurses. So it's all just sort of got lost in the noise, basically. And then you've got COVID and all the
Then you got COVID, yeah.
Inflation, Brexit, whatever. There's lots of things to muddy the water and lots of things to sort of cover the, like, things that get in the way, basically. So it hasn't gained the same mainstream, I guess, attention as it should have, or could have, or maybe will do. So it's
well,
yeah.
can I ask what the are the penalties and fines really harsh there? Like 9 years in prison?
A bit like America, it's almost a postcode lottery. So if you're in one state, one county, one region of the UK, it could be looked upon with great empathy and great sympathy. Whereas if you're in another part of the UK, usually in a big city, in a metropolitan area, it's treated far more harshly and criminally in a way. So if you're in London or Manchester, in one of the big metropolitan areas, their police are very militaristic with how they administer the law, and it's very much a combative process rather than a rural police force where they're a bit more understanding of, well, look, most of the population's in their 60s to 80s, everyone wants to retire, they just don't want murders and organized crime going on, or dangerous crimes. They don't mind about cannabis use. Everyone's spread out. Everyone isn't crammed in on top of each other where you can smell cannabis smoke and everyone irritates each other. So depending on where you are, you'll maybe get away with a bit more. Typically, if you're growing under 8 plants, that will be seen as personal use, and so they probably won't prosecute you. It'll be a rather anxiety-inducing process for the most part, but above 8 plants, that's when they start talking about basically sharing it, or you've been intending to supply it and distribute dangerous drugs. But really, as long as you stay out of, as long as you don't it doesn't come with antisocial behavior, most people in the UK quite comfortable with that. There's millions of cannabis users out there. That was all these polls that we see, but not everyone is problematic with their cannabis use, so they're not driving around doing donuts in the car park, huge joints hanging out the window. They usually just set them down in the garden or at a barbecue, or in the back garden having a quick joint, or eating a brownie or something that a friend's made. So as long as but it doesn't become antisocial, basically, it's usually not an issue. But obviously you can then get, like, for example, as a bit of a horror story, there's a chap called Tony Bevington, who's now an activist in the UK. We did a little charity awareness thing around his story, basically. So I don't want to hatchet his age, but 70 to 80-year-old chap, basically has kidney disease. NHS has said, well, we can't really do much for your kidneys, just go home and do what you can, more or less, while your kidneys slowly fail. So he was growing his own cannabis. The police decided, well, basically someone called the police because they maybe had a falling out or didn't like him for whatever reason. And they were going to basically take his house away because he was growing some cannabis in his house. And this is an 80-year-old man, basically sent home to die slowly. They were going to take his house. They were going to take everything he had, his daughter's inheritance, the lot.
Oh my God.
Because he had a few cannabis plants, and they were basically saying, well, how do we know you haven't made all this from cannabis sales? And so if they really want to, they can go on a power trip and take as much or as little as they want. And so if there isn't someone there calling it out and trying to provide a bit of balance, that's where some of this goes wrong. We've had patients with brain tumors getting arrested because their brother doesn't like that they use cannabis for their brain tumor. Police kick in the door, arrest the man with the brain tumor. Again, these are people that the NHS, the government, the health services won't touch because they're too ill. So they go home, try and become self-reliant, ease the pain. Then in the last years of their life, they get dragged through the criminal system because of their cannabis use.
Horrible.
So that's the sort of, again, we've changed the law, but in reality, that's still what's going on. And so that's, again, a big, like I go to court as much as I can really to try and provide evidence, or if a patient has a case, well, look, here's 1,000 papers on cannabis in fibromyalgia. It's clear evidence, but we have a very outdated 50-year-old piece of drug policy, basically, that and a very old government system really as well, that doesn't necessarily reflect the latest and most current science and knowledge and information that we have. So yeah, anything in the Academy of Cannabis Science course would basically be sci-fi to to people in the British government. It's too I don't know, too thought-provoking basically, and too much information to handle, too many dichotomies and sort of conflicting bits of information for them to handle. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge really. And
so I have a question.
Please, Donna.
Yeah. You know, we're talking about cannabis as medicine. Is there any testing done over there, or any requirements for testing?
So, good question. We didn't think this far ahead when we changed the law. So at the moment, the industry is still basically lobbying for what restrictions are in place, what testing guidelines there are. And this is what sort of pissed me off and is the most sort of, I think, disappointing, is that, and this is a good example of just like how low the patient experience is. If you are a patient purchasing your products, and this goes back to James's question as well, here, and Natalie's as well, the only information that you have in order to make your decision on which cannabis product to choose is a certificate of analysis that just shows you the CBD and THC ratio. It doesn't tell you any other information. You wouldn't even think there was anything else in the product. There is lots of terpenes and everything else in between, but they just reduce it down to, what are the percentages of THC and CBD? So if you're a product, you're just going, well, paying for all this extra money, I want to know what's in it at the very least. And there isn't a very high standard for those patients at a medical level, and then at a wellness level, over-the-counter sort of CBD products. People don't know what to look out for. People don't realize that there's different products out there. Not all products are the same. Not all CBD is equal. And so you get a lot of people buying hemp seed oil thinking it's CBD or has CBD in it. By contrast, you could get a CBD product that's got lots of THC in it. So if they go and take that thinking that'll help their knees, and then they go and have a drug test at work the next day, that could then mean that they fail the drugs test because they've taken a contaminated product with THC in it, which is still technically an illicit substance. So over-the-counter products can't have THC in them, CBN or CBGA, but no one's testing any of that. No one's holding any of that accountable. And because the product's changing all the time, it's a live product. It's could be one thing this week and another thing next week. And so again, if that's on the shelves for a few weeks, or if you're a consumer, it was tested a month ago or when it was bottled, you really haven't got a clue what's going on. And yeah, that's why it's so hard basically for consumers, is inconsistent testing. There are no standardized testing requirements. There's no standardized information. So it's just good luck make money if you can, sell what you can. Hopefully no one catches you. Hopefully you don't get contaminated with something or drink too many heavy metals or pesticides in your product. But basically it's like playing Minesweeper, Lana. I don't know if you remember on like the old Windows XP where you could do the red flags and see where the mines were. That's basically how it is with CBD products. There's nothing, it's very hard to find a reliable source. And if you've got no information to start with, you've not done a Academy of Science cannabis course, you're not going to have a clue what's true, what's false, how do you hold anyone accountable as well. So again, that was really the point of the book too, is lots of patients will spend 60 to 80, £100 plus on a cannabis product, but could probably save themselves a lot of money if they spent £20 on a book beforehand, if they knew it was there, even to make sure that they're not being conned or scammed or contaminated in some way. So yeah, that's kind of get we're trying to fill. And I saw a hand go up there, Wendy, as well.
I thank you for your insight. I have a whole new sense of gratitude because I really did need that too. Thank you. God, sorry to hear about that. That's so I don't know. I am so grateful for what we've got going on, where we've got going it, where it's going on. But your insight, since you did that research, I'd like to know, did you get any insight about people with immune system deficiencies? And then too, like, ingestion, how the difference in ingesting it or smoking it, like your insights into solutions.
Cool. Yeah. Happy to, Wendy. So I'll sort of work backwards from that because you mentioned about consumption. So what we're trying to push over here is more like evidence-based consumption. So a lot of smokers of cannabis, and most people in the UK smoke cannabis if they do consume it, don't realize how much of their THC or cannabis they're actually wasting by combusting it. So estimating, and best estimates are that if you are smoking it, 90% of the THC is destroyed when you're inhaling that cannabis. So most of the smoke, most of the constituents is actually carbon monoxide from the combustion. So you're wasting 90% of your cannabis money, everything. By contrast, vaporization, you're conserving and absorbing 90% of the cannabinoids, and maybe 10% left over in the plant matter at the end once it's vaped. So that initial bit of information is enough for someone that's smoking 10 joints a day with multiple cigarettes in it to go, it was getting expensive, and so maybe I'll get a vaporizer. And I've had a friend that was a chain, smoked cigarettes, and most people smoke cigarettes in the UK, bad habit. But they get into cigarettes because they used to put tobacco in their joints. And so most older cannabis consumers or cigarette smokers got into tobacco because they used to have to smoke hash with tobacco, and that was the only way to sort of consume cannabis. So dialing it way back to the potency consumption thing, edibles, if you're consuming orally in an edible, that'll maybe take 1 to 4 hours to absorb, but you will get all of that for the most part, and that will transform and convert into a more potent, longer acting version of THC. Forget the name. But basically that'll stay in your body longer, and it'll slowly migrate towards your fat, where a lot of your cannabinoids tend to stay in the fat just because the lipophilic and like oily places. Tinctures, only 6 to 10% of those are actually absorbed. So one bad thing really about the CBD industry in the UK is that they're not realizing that only 6% of their product is actually being absorbed by the human body in the industry. So the biggest problem with CBD is just your body doesn't want it. It's hard to absorb. It's a pretty useless molecule all around, really. Lots of wonderful therapeutic properties, but it's really hard for the body to deal with and digest. So edibles are great because they help the absorption process in different ways. But if you're just using tinctures, 6% of that being absorbed isn't really good enough. And if you're eating anything, imagine you're drinking a beer, but only 6% of it's actually being absorbed, or you're eating food and only 6% of it's being absorbed. That's pretty, I mean, you buy petrol, but maybe only 6% of your petrol actually gets used. You'd start thinking, well, I'm not going to keep doing this anymore, or these products are terrible, I'm not going to use these anymore. Cannabis is a dud. That's a myth. So when it comes to that absorbing, it's just helping people find the best consumption method for them so that it fits their needs, basically. So if you've got arthritis, the best way maybe isn't to eat it, but rather apply it topically to the arthritic area. And then at a research level, what's going on in the body and in the cells and in the endocannabinoid system when we introduce cannabinoids into the body. In cancer, every tumor has its own unique fingerprint and endocannabinoid system profile. So in the future, what we'll be able to do is create drugs specific to that fingerprint and profile. At the moment, we just use the cannabis carpet bombing method, throw as many terpenes and cannabinoids into the body as we can and hope that has a therapeutic effect. But in the next, I think 5-10 years, we'll be able to test the endocannabinoid system, design a sort of personalized treatment in a way, and then use that as a more direct, precise treatment method for more complex conditions. But I think this medical paradigm of cannabis and bud and that all being very similar to recreational cannabis, like it's all comes down to, well, it's all medical. The cannabis constituents are all going to have the same effect anyway. It's just how we define it is a social construct, and so lots of people get lost in the words, but it's more the facts that help navigate that conversation. But a couple of insights there, Wendy, but I've just scratched the surface. So any more questions?
Well, for clarity, is tincture and oil the same, or is oil the same as an edible?
So tincture and oil, both pretty useless unless they're infused in a food. So that food usually helps that
oil in a capsule
into the body. Oil in a capsule with a meal is usually preferable. But by the time you say took a tincture, put it under your tongue, swallowed it, and it's got into your stomach acid, most of that's just dead, and probably just going to be excreted out without any benefit to the body and without the body even reacting to it. So that's what happens for most people in the UK is they'll try a CBD product. Most of the products are tinctures. They'll try it and go, well, that was crap, that didn't really work, and then shop around, waste some money on some more products, they don't really work, and then so it's hard as a consumer. There's very little consistency. A lot of these companies aren't seeing many repeat buyers, and so again, a lot of them are struggling to sell their products at the moment as well, is because people are getting bored of bad tasting fishy oils in their mouth and not getting much effect. So I guess consumers are getting a bit more savvy, but at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of arbitrary sort of products that don't really have much, don't really provide much guidance to the consumer to be able to work out what's going on. And then there's no facts like that to be able to help them work out, well, maybe vaporization is best for me versus consumption, or maybe a topical would be best. So,
and if I could point out, one tincture to the next is different, right? We know bioavailability depending on the way the tincture is produced. We know some water-soluble tinctures now are doing great for people where they're, I don't know if you've tried any of the Green Wave tinctures. I'm sorry, Green Revolution has a product that it's amazing because it doesn't feel like oil in your mouth. It just absorbs right into the lining of your mouth. And so it's not like you're holding that oily, which can be a real turnoff. So if you all have not tried tinctures that are, we talk about nano emulsions, they're real. And so these products are pretty phenomenal. So Chris, I hope that you'll have an opportunity, or I hope those will come on the market there, because it really can make a difference. I know you mentioned in passing 11-hydroxyl tetrahydrocannabinol is the product. About 50% of the THC will be converted by your liver into this, which is much stronger than THC, times stronger, and that's why you can feel so underwater from an edible, right? And so as you're studying about how our liver processes cannabinoids, pay attention to that, because that's an important part of the science. And I'm saying this to our people online, pay attention to that, because just like Chris was mentioning, the bioavailability is important, because if you are burning it out up in a pipe, it's different than consuming it in a vaporizer. This is just a much more efficient way to consume, and your money goes farther, your weed goes farther. Chris, we are at time, and I apologize, because I know we could keep talking, but I do want to call out and recognize that we wouldn't have legal cannabis here if not for people like you, patients, patient advocates, doctors who are willing to stick their neck out to say, hey, look, this is worth a look. It's not only worth a look, it's helping people. So on those days that you get frustrated, on those days that you look to other places that are maybe out ahead of where the UK is, hang in there, because the work you're doing is critically important. It's only because of advocates like you, advocates that we have on the line now to continue to push that, that we have decriminalization to start and then legalization after that. So we appreciate your efforts, and they're not in vain. So just remember that.
Thank you, Jay.
Well, for real, this is kind of we will learn that we will learn what it's like to be like our ancestors when it comes to cannabis in time, where the plant is valued. It's just part of everybody's pharmacopoeia option, and but we got to get out of this reefer madness thinking or skunk madness thinking. And so thanks for helping your countrymen and immediately around you and beyond to reconsider what they think they know, and to actually get embedded in the science, of which there is a lot. So thanks for being on today.
Yes,
No,
thank
my
you.
pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Lovely speaking to you all. Thank you for being such lovely listeners. And thank you for all of your lovely questions and kind words as well. Thank you so much. And these are super.
Well, and absolutely look up Global Cannabinoid Solutions. You can contact Chris through their website. So if you want to follow up with him about the work that he's doing, the work that they are doing, you have one more friend in the cannabis business, and in this case, just across the water. So Chris, if you ever make it over here, let us know. You got more friends in the U.S. now, and we'd be happy to take you on a tour of some dispensaries and some
that'd be lovely.
and some grows and things like that.
No, thank you so much. That'd be amazing, and I'll definitely get myself over to Washington at some point. It's I think Seattle's probably my favorite North American city. I don't want to say that too strongly, but Seattle or San Francisco, they're my two favorites at the moment. I'm torn, and I do love Vancouver as well, which is a bit further up. But West Coast.
Love to see you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for spending your Saturday with us. Oh, don't forget, next month. So for the month of September, and the first Saturday of September, we're going to have Naoko Miki on with Green Wave Japan. She's leading advocacy efforts in Japan out of Tokyo. She's also a part-time Washington resident, so she shares her time between here and Tokyo. So she's got a foot in the legal industry and a foot in the advocacy industry, similar to Chris, where she's living part-time in a place where things just are not as far along as she knows they can be. But she's bringing in people like Dr. Russo, and different folks to speak to universities there. So we're going to have her on in September. We hope you'll join us. Chris, thanks again for your time. Everybody, thanks for your time, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.